Have you ever felt humiliated? I don't mean the kind of embarrassment that makes you want to duck your head and walk away. I'm talking about a soul-crushing humiliation, the kind that gnaws at you and leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about your life. That's where I found myself 3 years ago when I walked into our kitchen and saw my wife, Emily, laughing too hard at one of our neighbor Brandon's jokes. His hand lingered on her shoulder a beat too long, and her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't for me in months. At the time, I shrugged it off. Who was I to suspect her of anything? Brandon was just the friendly guy next door, always eager to lend a hand. My paranoia would have made me the bad guy, right? But tonight, there were no excuses. There was no plausible deniability left. I had come home early from a work conference. The meeting had ended sooner than expected, and I thought I'd surprise Emily and our 3-year-old daughter, Lily. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Brandon's truck parked right out front. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was helping Emily with something again, like the time he fixed our leaky faucet. I grabbed my suitcase and headed inside, eager to see my family. The house was eerily quiet. No cartoon music, no laughter from Lily. Just muffled voices coming from upstairs, our bedroom. My heart started to pound as I ascended the stairs. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but deep down I already knew. When I pushed the door open, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. There she was, my wife of 8 years, tangled in our sheets with Brandon. His sweat slicked back faced me as he moved against her. Emily gasped when she saw me, shoving him off and scrambling to cover herself. "Oh my God, Mark! What are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice flat, emotionless. "This is my house, my room, my wife." Brandon shot me a sheepish look as he tugged on his jeans. "Mark, man. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I spat, finally finding the rage buried under my shock. "So you weren't just having sex with my wife?" Emily burst into tears. "It's not what you think. Please, let me explain." I stared at her, disgusted. "What exactly is there to explain, Emily? That you've been sneaking around with the guy who mows our lawn?" Brandon's face darkened at the jab. "Hey, watch it, man. Don't make this worse than it is." "Worse than it is?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You're screwing my wife in my bed, and you think I'm the one making it worse?" After Brandon left, rattled but still cocky enough to tell me he'd talk to me later, Emily collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. "It only happened once," she pleaded. "It was a mistake. I swear, Mark, you're a terrible liar." I snapped. "How long?" She hesitated, and that brief pause told me everything I needed to know. 3 years, she admitted quietly. 3 years. The timeline hit me like a freight train. Lily was 3 years old. My mind spiraled. I remembered the way Brandon had always been so affectionate with Lily, ruffling her hair, bringing over little toys, just because. The way Emily would light up whenever he walked into the room. I thought about Lily's hair, lighter than mine, almost the same shade as Brandon's. Her smile so similar to his. I stared at Emily, my voice trembling with fury. "Is Lily even mine?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second I saw fear. "Of course she is," she said a little too quickly. "How could you even ask me that?" "How could I not?" I countered. "After this," she begged, pleaded, swore up and down that I was Lily's father. But her desperation only fueled my doubt. That night, I ordered a DNA test kit online. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. I just waited. The results came back 2 weeks later. I opened the envelope in my car, too afraid of what I might do if I read it in the house. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Probability of paternity. 0%. The words blurred as rage consumed me. Emily had lied to me for 3 years. She had let me love and care for a child that wasn't mine, all while carrying on her affair with Brandon. I stormed into the house, clutching the paper like it was a weapon. Emily was in the living room playing with Lily. The sight of them together made my blood boil. "Is she his?" I demanded, holding up the results. Emily's face turned ashen. Mark, please. Is she his? I roared. She crumbled, sobbing into her hands. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know, okay? It was only once at first, but then, I don't know. I turned on my heel and left, unable to look at her. I needed to talk to Brandon. Brandon was outside, trimming his hedges like nothing had happened. When he saw me marching over, his smirk faded. Mark, man, let's just talk about this. I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized what I was doing. He stumbled back, clutching his face. You've been sleeping with my wife and raising my kid like she's yours? I snarled. He straightened, his expression shifting to anger. Hey, don't put this all on me. Your wife came to me, okay? And Lily, she might not even be yours. That's what I thought, I said coldly. But you better hope she isn't. Because if she is, I'm coming for you. Brandon's confidence wavered, but he tried to save face. You want to fight, Mark? Fine. But don't think you're going to take Lily from Emily. She's her mother. I leaned in close, my voice low and venomous. Watch me. The divorce was ugly. Emily tried to paint me as a vengeful husband, but the DNA test results worked in my favor. I filed for full custody of Lily on the grounds that Emily's infidelity and deception made her an unfit parent. To everyone's surprise, the judge sided with me. Emily was inconsolable. She screamed in the courtroom, calling me every name in the book. Brandon showed up to support her, but his presence only made her look worse. In the end, the court awarded me custody, and Emily was left with supervised visitation. As I walked out of the courthouse with Lily in my arms, I felt a strange mix of victory and heartbreak. She wasn't my biological daughter, but she was mine in every way that mattered. I would raise her, love her, and protect her from the mess her mother had made. As for Emily and Brandon, they got what they deserved, each other. Life after the divorce was far from simple. Lily was my light, the reason I kept going, but the chaos Emily left behind had a way of lingering. Every other weekend, I had to hand Lily over to Emily for her court-mandated supervised visits. Each time, it felt like I was ripping a piece of myself away. Emily tried to play the role of the doting mother, but I could see through her facade. Her eyes would dart to Brandon, who often hung around during drop-offs like some glorified bodyguard. It was his smugness that stung the most, a constant reminder of what they'd done to me. And then there was Lily. She didn't understand why Mommy and Daddy weren't together anymore, why she wasn't allowed to stay overnight at Mommy's house, or why I got so tense whenever Brandon's name came up. She'd ask me questions I couldn't answer, her big, innocent eyes full of confusion. Daddy, why can't Mommy come to my birthday party? She asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I forced a smile, brushing her blonde curls away from her face. It's complicated, sweetheart, but I promise we'll make your birthday really special. Her lip quivered, but she nodded. Okay, Daddy. 3 weeks later, I threw Lily a small party in the backyard. Just family and a few friends, no Emily, no Brandon. But, of course, drama had a way of finding me. Halfway through the party, I noticed Emily's car pulling up outside the house. She wasn't supposed to be here. The court order was clear. Supervised visits only, and no unannounced drop-ins. Yet there she was, stepping out of the car with Brandon right behind her. Mark, she called, her voice a mix of desperation and defiance. I just want to see Lily. You can't keep me away from my daughter. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. Emily, you know the rules. You're not supposed to be here. She's my daughter too. Emily shot back, her voice rising. Brandon crossed his arms, his presence like a taunt. Maybe you should let her see Lily, Mark. You're not the only one who loves that kid. That was it. I marched toward them, my anger bubbling to the surface. You don't get to talk about love, Brandon. Not after what you've done. He stepped forward, his chest puffed out. And what are you going to do about it, huh? You think you're some kind of saint? Get over yourself. Enough! Emily shrieked, tears streaming down her face. Can we stop fighting, just for one day? It's Lily's birthday, for God's sake. You're the one who brought the fight here. I snapped. You couldn't even respect your own daughter's day enough to follow the damn rules. Emily broke down, sobbing into her hands. Brandon glared at me but seemed unsure of what to do. Finally, he grabbed her arm. Come on, Emily. Let's go. As they drove off, I turned back to the party, forcing myself to smile for Lily's sake. But inside, I was seething. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, after the party was over and Lily was asleep, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Brandon stood there, his face shadowed by the dim porch light. What the hell are you doing here? I hissed. He didn't answer right away, his jaw working like he was chewing over his words. Finally, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're so high and mighty, don't you, Mark? Taking Lily away from her mother. Acting like you're some perfect dad. I folded my arms. You got something to say? Or are you just here to waste my time? His expression darkened. You don't want to push me, man. I've been patient. But I'm not gonna let you keep Emily and Lily out of my life. Lily's not your kid, I said coldly. And Emily? You can have her. She's your problem now. Brandon's lips curled into a sneer. You sure about that? Because I know things, Mark. Things that could make your life a lot harder. I stepped forward, my voice dropping to a dangerous tone. Is that a threat? It's a promise, he said, his tone dripping with malice. Think about it. You've already lost your wife. How much more are you willing to lose? He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched and mind racing. What was he planning? What could he possibly have on me? Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Brandon started showing up more often, lurking at Lily's daycare, driving by my house late at night. Emily played innocent, claiming she didn't know what he was up to, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. Then came the letter, a legal notice from Brandon demanding a paternity test for Lily. He was trying to claim her as his own. The audacity of it was staggering. After everything he'd done, he had the nerve to think he could take Lily from me? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this was about control. Brandon didn't care about Lily. He just wanted to hurt me. Fine. If he wanted a fight, I'd give him one. Brandon's demand for a paternity test sent shockwaves through my life. The sheer nerve of it was infuriating. As if he hadn't already done enough to wreck my marriage. Now he wanted to waltz in and stake a claim on Lily? It wasn't going to happen. Not while I still had breath in my lungs. I handed the legal notice to my lawyer, Karen Bradley. She was sharp, no nonsense, and not afraid to play hardball. This is absurd, I said, pacing her office. He's not even listed on the birth certificate. He's just doing this to mess with me. Karen nodded, her expression calm but serious. Unfortunately, Brandon has the legal right to petition for a paternity test, if he can show a reasonable basis for questioning Lily's parentage. Given your ex-wife's history, he might have a case. So what? I have to just let him invade our lives because he wants to make trouble? I slammed my hand on her desk. This is my daughter. I'm the one who's raised her. He doesn't get to swoop in now like he's some kind of hero. Karen folded her hands. I understand how you feel, Mark, but this isn't about emotions. It's about the law. We'll fight this. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that the court could order a test. The thought made my stomach churn. Lily had already been through so much. Losing the stability of a two-parent home, dealing with the tension between me and Emily. Now this felt like the final straw. I confronted Emily the next day. She was standing on her porch when I arrived, sipping coffee like she didn't have a care in the world. Brandon filed for a paternity test, I said without preamble. Her face went pale. He did what? You heard me, I snapped. He wants a DNA test. To claim Lily. Emily's hands trembled as she set her mug down. Mark, I swear, I didn't know he was going to do this. I never agreed to it. I laughed bitterly. Oh, so now you want to act like you're not involved? You've been letting him play daddy for years. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. She was good at this, turning on the waterworks to make herself the victim. I didn't want any of this, Mark. I didn't think it would go this far. Well, it has, I said coldly. And now I have to protect Lily from the mess you created. If Brandon gets his way, it's going to tear her life apart. Emily broke down, collapsing onto the porch steps. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I was stupid. I made a mistake, and now I don't know how to fix it. It's too late for apologies, Emily, I said, turning to leave. Fixing this is my job now. The day of the hearing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Emily sat on one side with Brandon, while I was on the other with Karen. Brandon's lawyer, a slick, arrogant man named David Carlton, argued that the test was in Lily's best interest. Your Honor, he said, my client simply wants to know the truth. If he is Lily's biological father, he has the right to be involved in her life. Karen stood, her tone cutting. The truth is, Mr. Parker had no involvement in Lily's life for the first 3 years. He has no established relationship with her and no legal standing. This is nothing more than a vindictive attempt to disrupt my client's custody. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked between the two of them. Mr. Carlton, why did your client wait 3 years to file this petition? David adjusted his tie. Your Honor, my client was unaware of the child's existence until recently. Karen didn't miss a beat. And yet he's been involved with the child's mother for years. That excuse doesn't hold water. The judge frowned, clearly irritated by the drama unfolding before her. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I'm ordering the paternity test. While the circumstances are unusual, the potential biological father has a right to establish paternity. However, I want this matter resolved quickly. We will reconvene once the results are available. My heart sank. Despite Karen's best efforts, the test was happening. The war wasn't over, but this battle felt like a loss. After the hearing, I found Brandon waiting for me in the parking lot. He leaned against his truck, a smug grin plastered across his face. Guess I'm gonna get my answers, huh? He said, his tone dripping with arrogance. I walked past him, unwilling to engage, but he stepped in front of me. You can't ignore me forever, Mark. Once that test proves I'm her dad, things are gonna change around here. I glared at him, my voice low and steady. Lily isn't a pawn in your little game. You don't care about her. You just want to hurt me. But you're not going to win. Brandon's grin faltered, and for a moment, I saw the cracks in his bravado. But then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You think you're so untouchable, but everyone's got a breaking point. Don't push me, Mark. I didn't flinch. Stay away from my daughter. That's the only warning you'll get. 2 weeks later, the results came in. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, dreading what I might find. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Lily was Brandon's daughter. The reality hit me like a freight train, but instead of breaking me, it steeled my resolve. Biology didn't make someone a parent. I was the one who had loved her, cared for her, and been there every day of her life. No test could change that. When we returned to court, I was ready to fight. Brandon might have been Lily's biological father, but he wasn't her dad. Not in any way that mattered. And I was going to prove it. The courtroom was packed for the second hearing, with tension thick enough to choke on. Emily was there again, sitting beside Brandon, her face pale and drawn. Brandon, on the other hand, looked like a man ready to claim his prize. He smirked at me as I took my seat, his arrogance radiating like a beacon. Karen leaned toward me, her voice steady. Stay calm, Mark. We've got this. I nodded, though my hands trembled under the table. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a battle for my family, for my soul. David Carlton stood first, striding to the center of the courtroom with the practiced ease of a man used to winning. He laid out Brandon's case with cold efficiency, wielding the DNA results like a weapon. Your Honor, he began. The evidence is clear. My client, Brandon Parker, is Lily's biological father. He was kept in the dark about her existence for years, but now that the truth is out, he wants to step up and take responsibility. He's willing to share custody with Mr. Walker, as long as Lily can know her real father. I clenched my fists under the table, my jaw tightening. Karen must have sensed my frustration because she gave me a sharp look, a silent warning to keep my cool. Your Honor, Carlton continued, Lily deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves the chance to build a relationship with her biological parent. Karen rose as soon as he finished, her movements deliberate and controlled. Your Honor, while the DNA results confirm Mr. Parker's biological connection to Lily, biology alone does not make someone a parent. Mr. Walker has been Lily's sole caregiver since her birth. He has provided her with a stable, loving home and has built an unbreakable bond with her. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Introducing a new paternal figure at this stage in Lily's life, especially one with no prior relationship to her, would be disruptive and potentially damaging. This isn't about Mr. Parker's rights. It's about Lily's well-being. The judge called Emily to the stand next. She looked terrified as she made her way forward, wringing her hands like a nervous teenager caught in a lie. Mrs. Walker, the judge began, why did you withhold the truth about Lily's paternity for so long? Emily's voice wavered. I didn't know for sure at first, she admitted. When Lily was born, I thought Mark was her father. But then, over time, I started to have doubts. And yet you said nothing? The judge pressed. You allowed Mr. Walker to raise a child who might not be his, all while carrying on a relationship with Mr. Parker? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I was scared. I didn't want to lose Mark, and I didn't know how to tell him the truth. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I love Lily, and I only want what's best for her. Karen rose to cross-examine, her tone sharp but professional. Mrs. Walker, how long have you been romantically involved with Mr. Parker? Emily hesitated, glancing at Brandon. It started before Lily was born, she admitted quietly. And yet you let Mr. Walker believe he was Lily's father all this time? Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to hurt him. Yet here we are, Karen said, her words like a dagger. Brandon took the stand next, his cocky demeanor on full display. He painted himself as the victim of Emily's deceit, a man wronged by circumstances beyond his control. I didn't even know Lily was mine until recently, he said, glancing toward the judge. But now that I do, I want to be there for her. She's my daughter, and I have a right to be in her life. Karen's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Parker, she began, how many times have you visited Lily since filing this case? Brandon hesitated. A few times, but that's only because of the court order. And how often have you provided financial support for her? I didn't know she was mine, he snapped. Karen raised an eyebrow. So you've done nothing for her financially, emotionally, or otherwise. Yet you believe you're entitled to uproot her life and demand custody. Brandon's confidence wavered, but he quickly recovered. I'm her father. That should count for something. Karen's tone turned icy. Biology might give you a claim, Mr. Parker, but parenting is about more than DNA. Lily doesn't know you. She doesn't need you. What she needs is stability, and that's something you can't provide. When it was my turn to speak, I felt the weight of the courtroom's eyes on me. I took a deep breath, focusing on one thing. Lily. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Lily is my daughter. I've been there for her every single day since she was born. I've fed her, bathed her, comforted her when she was sick. I was the one who held her when she cried for her mother after the divorce. She doesn't know Brandon. To her, I'm her father. And that's all that should matter. I paused, glancing at Brandon. He may have a biological claim, but he doesn't have the right to tear apart the life Lily knows just to satisfy his ego. The judge nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Walker. The judge's decision came a week later. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding as she read her ruling. After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimony of all parties, she said, it is clear that Mr. Walker has been the primary caregiver and father figure in Lily's life. While Mr. Parker's biological connection is acknowledged, It is not in Lily's best interest to disrupt her current custody arrangement. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I had won. Lily was safe. As we left the courtroom, Brandon glared at me, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over, Mark," he hissed. "You'll regret this." But I didn't care. Let him threaten, let him stew. Lily was mine, and nothing he said or did could change that. Winning custody of Lily felt like a triumph. But the fallout was far from over. Brandon's threats were more than hot air, and Emily's continued instability only added fuel to the fire. For months after the court's decision, Brandon became a looming shadow in my life. He'd park outside my house late at night, just sitting in his truck, watching. Sometimes he'd follow me and Lily to the grocery store or her dance class. It was calculated intimidation, designed to make me feel like I was never truly free of him. I documented everything: times, dates, locations. Karen advised me to file a restraining order, but I hesitated. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily, especially with Lily in the mix. But Brandon had other plans. One night, just as I was putting Lily to bed, my phone buzzed. Emily's name lit up the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail but answered, more out of habit than curiosity. "What is it, Emily?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Lily. Her voice was frantic. "Mark, you have to help me." I frowned. "Help you? What's going on?" "It's Brandon," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "He's out of control. He's been drinking and he's angry. He keeps saying it's my fault he lost in court." I sighed, leaning against the wall. "Emily, that's not my problem. You chose to stay with him." "Please, Mark," she begged. "He's threatening to come after you. He says he's not done fighting for Lily." I stiffened. "He said that?" "Yes," she whispered. "And I think he means it." For a moment I considered hanging up. Emily's drama had caused enough chaos in my life, and I wasn't eager to get dragged back into it. But if Brandon was spiraling, ignoring the situation might put Lily in danger. "I'll handle it," I said finally. "But you need to figure out your own mess, Emily." A few nights later, Brandon showed up on my doorstep. He wasn't alone. A second man stood beside him, bigger and meaner looking, with a tattoo snaking up his neck. My heart pounded as I opened the door, keeping it partially blocked with my foot. "What do you want, Brandon?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Brandon smirked, his breath reeking of alcohol. "We need to talk, Mark. You and me. Man to man." "I don't have anything to say to you," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Go home." The tattooed man stepped closer, his presence like a physical threat. "Maybe you should listen to him," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You wouldn't want anything bad to happen." My jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" Brandon chuckled darkly. "It's a promise. You think you've won, Mark, but you haven't. Lily's my daughter, and one way or another, I'm going to make sure she knows it." My patience snapped. "You're a coward, Brandon. A drunk, pathetic coward who uses threats because you've got nothing else. Get off my property, or I'll call the cops." Brandon's smirk faltered, but the tattooed man stepped forward again, his gaze cold and predatory. "You sure you want to do that, buddy?" I held my ground, my hand inching toward my phone. "Try me." After a long, tense moment, Brandon finally backed off, muttering under his breath. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with venom. Then he and his lackey turned and left, their truck peeling out of the driveway. The next morning, I called Karen and explained the situation. By noon, I had filed for a restraining order against Brandon. It was granted almost immediately, thanks to the evidence I'd been compiling for months. Brandon didn't take the news well. He sent a barrage of angry texts, accusing me of turning Lily against him, of ruining his life. I ignored them all and forwarded everything to Karen. But even with the restraining order in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still lurking, waiting for his next move. Emily called again a week later, her voice trembling with fear. "Brandon's furious," she said. He's saying he's going to take matters into his own hands. I sighed. Then maybe it's time you left him, Emily. He's dangerous. I can't, she whispered. He won't let me. Her words sent a chill down my spine. For all her faults, Emily didn't deserve to be trapped in Brandon's toxic web. But rescuing her wasn't my job. My only priority was Lily. The breaking point came on a stormy Friday night. I was home with Lily, watching a movie in the living room, when the power suddenly went out. Lily clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, what happened?" she whispered. "It's just the storm," I said, trying to keep my voice reassuring. But something felt off. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the breaker box, only to find it intact. The power hadn't tripped, it had been cut. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. Brandon. I rushed back inside, locking the doors and calling the police. While I waited, I checked the security cameras I'd installed after Brandon's last stunt. Sure enough, there he was, prowling around the backyard with a crowbar in hand. His accomplice was with him, trying to force open the back door. The sound of sirens sent them running before they could break in, but the damage was done. Lily was terrified, and so was I. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was escalation. The next morning, I met with Karen and the police to discuss pressing charges. Brandon's restraining order violations and attempted break-in were enough to land him in serious trouble. With Karen's help, I filed for an emergency hearing to further restrict his access to Lily and strengthen my custody rights. At the hearing, Brandon's arrogance finally cracked. He ranted and raved, accusing me of turning everyone against him. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mr. Parker," she said sternly, "your behavior is not only unacceptable, it's dangerous. I'm issuing an extended restraining order, and any further violations will result in immediate incarceration." Brandon's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. He glared at me as if this were all my fault. But I didn't care. Lily was safe, and that was all that mattered. Brandon's downward spiral had reached its breaking point. After the court's extended restraining order, I hoped he would finally back off, but deep down, I knew he wasn't finished. His ego wouldn't let him lose quietly. He wanted revenge, and I was the target. For weeks, things were quiet, too quiet. No late-night appearances.
No threatening texts.
Even Emily stopped calling. Felt like the calm before the storm, and I wasn't wrong. It happened on a Sunday night. Lily and I were asleep when the smell of smoke jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then the sound of glass shattering brought me fully to my senses. I jumped out of bed and ran to Lily's room, scooping her up as flames licked at the edges of the living room. "Daddy, what's happening?" she cried, her little arms wrapping around my neck. "It's okay, baby," I said, though my heart was pounding. "We're getting out of here." The fire had spread fast, too fast to be an accident. I kicked open the back door and ran into the yard, shielding Lily from the heat. As we reached the fence, I glanced back and saw a figure disappearing into the shadows. Brandon. My blood boiled, but there was no time for revenge. The fire roared behind us, consuming everything I owned. I flagged down a neighbor, who called 911 while I tried to calm Lily. The fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was done. My house was a smoldering ruin, and I knew exactly who was responsible. The police arrived shortly after the fire was extinguished. I told them everything from the restraining order violations to the break-in attempt. They found traces of gasoline around the perimeter of the house and a broken bottle in the living room, a makeshift Molotov cocktail. It was arson, plain and simple. It didn't take long for the police to track Brandon down. When they arrested him, he denied everything, claiming I was trying to frame him. But his accomplice, the tattooed thug from the break-in, flipped under pressure, confessing that Brandon had planned the whole thing. The evidence was damning. Brandon was charged with arson, child endangerment, and violating the restraining order. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. A week after Brandon's arrest, Emily showed up at my temporary apartment. She looked gaunt, her eyes hollow and rimmed with red. I didn't want to let her in, but she begged me for just a few minutes. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said as she stepped inside. I had no idea he would go this far. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. What do you want, Emily? Tears streamed down her face. I've left him. For good this time. I'm trying to rebuild my life. But I need your help. I scoffed. My help? After everything you've done. I know I don't deserve it, she said, her voice cracking. But Lily does. She deserves a mother who's not a mess. And I'm trying to be that for her. Lily has me, I said coldly. She doesn't need you dragging her down. Emily flinched, her tears falling harder. Please, Mark, just let me see her more. Supervised, whatever the court allows. I'll do anything. I stared at her, torn between anger and pity. Part of me wanted to shut the door in her face, but another part remembered the woman I had once loved. The woman who had given me Lily, even if unintentionally. I'll think about it, I said finally. But this isn't about you, Emily. It's about what's best for Lily. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding our lives. Insurance helped me get back on my feet, and with Brandon behind bars, I finally felt like the nightmare was over. Emily stayed true to her word, attending therapy and staying out of trouble. Eventually, I agreed to let her see Lily under strict supervision. Lily was resilient. She bounced back from the fire faster than I expected, her bright smile returning as we settled into our new home. She didn't ask about Brandon, and I didn't volunteer any information. To her, I was the only father she needed, and that was enough. The last time I saw Brandon was at his sentencing. He glared at me as the judge handed down a 10-year prison sentence, his eyes full of venom. But I felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction. Just relief. As I walked out of the courtroom, I glanced back once, locking eyes with him. It was a silent message. You lost. Years later, I would tell Lily the truth about her parentage. Not because I wanted to, but because she deserved to know. By then, she was old enough to understand that family isn't defined by blood, but by love and commitment. She hugged me tightly after I finished explaining, her voice steady. You're my dad, no matter what. And in that moment I knew we had won. Not just the custody battle, but the war for our family.